a desperate woman, a nameless stranger. A marriage built on nothing but survival. When Lillian Moore stepped onto that westbound train with a one-way ticket to Wyoming, she wasn't chasing love. She was running from ruin. Her family's fortune had crumbled to dust, and the only thing standing between her and complete devastation was a marriage contract signed with a man whose face she'd never seen. But what happens when the stranger waiting at the altar turns out to be nothing like the letters promised? Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The creditors came on a Tuesday. Lillian Moore stood in the doorway of what had once been her father's study, watching strange men in dark suits catalog everything her family had ever owned. They moved through the Boston townhouse like vultures, marking items with tiny tags, their pens scratching against leather-bound ledgers with a sound that made her stomach turn. "This desk, mahogany, isn't it? Fetch a good price. The paintings in the hall, are those originals?" "Check the silverware. The mother had a collection, I'm told." The mother. As if Margaret Moore had been reduced to a footnote, a woman defined only by her possessions. Lillian's fingers tightened around the doorframe until her knuckles went white. Her mother had been dead 3 months. Her father had followed 6 weeks later, his heart simply giving out under the weight of what he'd lost. And now these men were picking through the remnants of their lives like children sorting through trinkets at a market stall. "Miss Moore." The voice came from behind her. Mr. Garrison, her father's former attorney. The word former doing a lot of work there, considering he'd been the first to jump ship when the investments went south. He stood in the hallway now, hat in hand, with that expression men wore when they were about to deliver news they considered unfortunate but ultimately not their problem. "Mr. Garrison." Lillian didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to look at him. "I've drawn up the final accounting, as you requested." Papers rustled. "Once the house is sold and the debt settled, I'm afraid there will be nothing left. Less than nothing, actually. Your father's business partner absconded with what remained of the liquid assets. The authorities are looking for him, but they won't find him." Lillian's voice was flat. "No, probably not." The silence that followed felt like falling. Lillian watched a man in a brown suit examine her mother's music box, the one that played Chopin when you opened the lid. He turned it over, checking the bottom for a maker's mark, completely indifferent to the fact that Margaret Moore had wound that box every single night before bed for 27 years. "There is one other matter." Mr. Garrison cleared his throat. "I've received an inquiry through shall we say, a marriage broker." That got her attention. Lillian turned slowly, studying the attorney's uncomfortable expression. A marriage broker. It's becoming quite common, actually. Men out west, they need wives. Women back east need security. The word tasted like ash. "Yes." Mr. Garrison looked relieved that she understood. "I took the liberty of reviewing the gentleman's finances. He's a rancher in Wyoming, widowed 2 years ago, property owner. By all accounts, respectable. He's looking for a wife to help manage his household. It would be a practical arrangement." Practical. What a bloodless word for selling yourself to a stranger. "Does this respectable rancher have a name?" "Ethan Hale. He's 32 years old. The broker has his letters, if you'd like to read them. He's willing to pay for your passage west and provide a modest dowry to settle your remaining debts. In exchange, you would marry him upon arrival and assist in running his ranch." Lillian looked back at the men cataloging her life. One of them was now examining the family Bible, checking whether the leather binding was genuine. "How modest is the dowry?" Mr. Garrison named a figure. It was enough to clear her father's debts and leave her with nothing. Not a cent to her name, but at least she wouldn't be dragging someone else's financial ruin into whatever came next. "And if I refuse?" The attorney shifted his weight. "Miss Moore, you're 23 years old, unmarried, with no living family and no prospects. Your father's scandal has made sure that no one in Boston society will receive you. You have no skills that would earn you employment, and even if you did, the wages for a woman alone—" He trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. She could end up in a factory, or worse. The unspoken possibilities crowded the hallway between them. "I'd like to see the letters." Lillian read them that night in her bedroom, soon to be someone else's bedroom, by candlelight. There were 4 letters, written in a steady, masculine hand that suggested education without pretension. Dear Miss Moore, I understand this arrangement may seem unusual to you. I assure you I'm not in the habit of seeking a wife through correspondence. My situation is straightforward. I run a cattle ranch in the Wind River Valley. The work is hard but honest. I lost my first wife to illness 2 years ago and have managed alone since then, but I've come to realize that a ranch of this size requires a partnership. I'm not writing to you with promises of romance. I believe honesty serves us better. What I can offer is a home, security, and respect. You would have your own room, your independence, and the freedom to make of this arrangement what you will. I ask only for your help in managing the household and whatever partnership we can build together. If this interests you, please write back. If not, I understand and wish you well. Ethan Hale. The other letters were similar in tone, practical, almost businesslike, but not unkind. He wrote about the ranch, the landscape, the rhythm of the seasons. He described Wyoming in clean, spare sentences that somehow made the mountains sound both beautiful and unforgiving. He mentioned his cattle, his 2 ranch hands, the nearest town being 15 miles away. What he didn't mention was anything personal. No discussion of his first wife beyond her death. No description of himself. No attempt to charm or seduce. It was the correspondence of a man seeking a business partner, not a bride. Lillian set the letters down and walked to her window. Boston spread out below her, gas lamps flickering in the October darkness. Somewhere in those streets were young women preparing for debuts, planning weddings to men their families approved of, worrying about the color of their ball gowns and whether they'd be invited to the right parties. 3 months ago, she'd been one of them. Now she was reading letters from a stranger in Wyoming who offered her a transaction instead of a courtship. And the terrifying thing, the absolutely terrifying thing, was that it was the best offer she'd received. The only offer she'd received. Wyoming, she whispered to the glass. She'd never been farther west than Philadelphia. She'd never seen a mountain. She'd never touched a cow. Everything she knew about ranch life came from dime novels her mother had considered too vulgar for proper young ladies. But she also knew this. In 3 weeks, this house would belong to someone else. The creditors would take everything, and Lillian Moore would be standing in the street with a single trunk and nowhere to go. Unless she got on a train, unless she married a man named Ethan Hale, unless she chose to survive, even if survival meant binding herself to a complete stranger in a place she couldn't even imagine. Lillian wrote her response the next morning. Dear Mr. Hale, I accept your proposal. I understand the terms and find them acceptable. I have no false expectations about the nature of this arrangement. I can keep house, manage accounts, and I'm a quick study. I'll arrive in Wyoming on the date specified. Please understand that I come to you with nothing. My family's fortune is gone. I bring no dowry, no connections, no advantages beyond my willingness to work. If this changes your interest, I'll understand. If it doesn't, I'll see you at the end of the rail line. Lillian Moore. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider, posted it before doubt could catch up with her, and then she began the grim work of preparing for a life she couldn't begin to picture. The wedding dress was the first casualty. The cream silk gown her mother had been saving, the one with French lace and seed pearls, the one meant for a Boston society wedding. Lillian sold it to a second-hand shop for enough money to buy practical traveling clothes. Heavy skirts, sturdy boots, a wool coat that would withstand cold she'd never experienced. Her friends, former friends really, heard she was leaving. Some sent notes expressing shock and concern, the kind of concern that was really judgment wrapped in sympathetic language. How could you? Surely there are other options. What would your dear mother say? Only one friend visited in person. Catherine Winters had been her closest companion since childhood, and she appeared at the townhouse door 2 days before Lillian's departure, looking stricken. Tell me you're not really doing this. Catherine stood in the parlor, still wearing her gloves, as if afraid that sitting down would somehow make her complicit. Marrying a stranger? Moving to Wyoming? Lily, this is madness. It's survival. It's desperation. There has to be another way. What way? Lillian faced her friend directly. Your parents won't even receive me anymore, Catherine. You know that, don't you? You came here in secret. If your mother knew you were visiting the scandalous Moore girl, don't call yourself that. Why not? It's what everyone else calls me. My father's business partner stole everything and ran, and somehow that makes me unmarriageable. I'm tainted by association. So, yes, I'm desperate. And yes, I'm marrying a man I've never met, because the alternative is ending up in a factory, or worse, and I won't apologize for choosing differently. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. But you don't love him. I don't know him. Love doesn't enter into it. It should. Lily, marriage should be... What? What should it be? Lillian's voice rose despite herself. A romance? A fairy tale? Look around you, Catherine. Look at what's left of my life. I don't have the luxury of waiting for love. I have the choice between marrying a stranger who's offering me security or ending up on the street. Those are my options. Not love. Not romance. Survival or ruin, that's it. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of men moving furniture in the rooms above them. Will you at least write to me? Catherine's voice was small. If he allows it. Lillian hadn't thought about whether her new husband would permit correspondence with her old life, another freedom she was gambling on. If I can. They embraced at the door, and Lillian felt Catherine shaking. When her friend pulled back, her face was composed again, that practiced society smile back in place. I hope he's kind to you, Catherine said. I hope I'm useful to him. It wasn't until Catherine had left that Lillian realized they'd been talking about completely different things. The train departed Boston on a gray November morning. Lillian stood on the platform with a single trunk containing everything she owned, practical dresses, undergarments, her mother's music box, she'd hidden it from the creditors, a daguerreotype of her parents, and Ethan Hale's letters. Everything else had been sold or claimed or lost. Mr. Garrison had come to see her off, perhaps from guilt, perhaps from duty. He handed her an envelope. Your ticket to Rawlins, Wyoming. And this. He passed her a smaller envelope. It's a return ticket dated 1 year from now. I purchased it from my own funds. Keep it somewhere safe. Lillian stared at the return ticket. Why? Because everyone should have a choice, Miss Moore. Even in desperate circumstances. Especially in desperate circumstances. If things don't work out, if you find yourself in a situation you can't bear, you can use that ticket to come back. I've included the name of a charity organization in Boston that assists women. It's not much, but it's something. She wanted to refuse it. Pride demanded she refuse it, but she tucked both tickets into her reticule because Mr. Garrison was right. Everyone should have a choice. Thank you, she said. Write if you need anything. And Miss Moore? He hesitated. I knew your father for 20 years. He made mistakes, yes, but he loved you very much. I think he'd be proud of your strength right now. Lillian couldn't respond to that without crying, so she simply nodded and boarded the train. The journey west took 5 days. Lillian watched the landscape transform outside her window. Cities giving way to towns, towns dissolving into farmland, farmland surrendering to prairie. The trees changed, then disappeared. The earth opened up into a vastness she'd never imagined possible. She shared a compartment with a family heading to Nebraska, a young mother with 3 children under the age of 7. The woman, Mary, was cheerful despite the chaos of managing 3 small humans in close quarters. First time west? Mary asked on the second day, after they'd established a cautious friendship. Yes, you? Lord, no. We're homesteaders. This is our 3rd claim. Lost the first to drought, lost the second to grasshoppers. My husband's convinced this one will take. Mary said it without bitterness, just a kind of weary acceptance. You're going back? After losing everything twice? What else would we do? Mary shifted the baby to her other hip. Can't afford to go back east? Can't afford to stay in one place if the land won't support us. So we keep moving, keep trying. That's what you do out here. You keep trying. Lillian thought about that for a long time. Keep trying. Such a simple philosophy for such a hard life. I'm getting married, she found herself saying, to a rancher in Wyoming. That right? How'd you meet him? I haven't. We've only corresponded. Mary didn't look shocked, which was somehow comforting. Mail-order bride, then. Plenty of women doing that nowadays. Western men need wives, Eastern women need security. Makes sense when you think about it. Does it work out? Usually? Mary considered this while wiping the nose of her middle child. Depends on the people, I suppose. I know some women who found good men, built good lives. I know others who found themselves in bad situations. Same as marriages back east, really. You never truly know a person until you're living with them. That's not very reassuring. No, Mary agreed cheerfully, but it's honest. You seem like a smart girl, though. You'll figure out quick enough what kind of man you've married. And if he's not decent, well... She glanced at Lillian's left hand, still bare of any ring. You haven't signed anything legal yet, have you? The marriage contract was sent ahead. We'll sign it when I arrive. Then you've still got choices. Remember that. Right up until you sign, you've got choices. The baby started crying, and Mary turned her attention to soothing him, but her words stayed with Lillian. You've got choices. Between Mr. Garrison's return ticket and Mary's reminder, Lillian felt something she hadn't felt in months, a tiny spark of control over her own fate. She might be heading into the unknown to marry a stranger, but she was doing it on her own terms. That had to count for something. By the fourth day, the landscape had become almost alien. Mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels, their peaks white with snow even in early November. The prairie stretched endlessly, gold and brown, and impossible to measure. The sky was bigger than Lillian had known sky could be, and at night the stars were so numerous and bright that she stood on the platform during a stop and simply stared upward until her neck ached. Never seen stars before? The conductor smiled at her shock. Not like this. Out here you can see forever. Sometimes that's beautiful. Sometimes it's terrifying. You'll figure out which you think it is. Lillian suspected it might be both. On the fifth day, the train pulled into Rawlins, Wyoming. The town, if you could call it that, consisted of a train station, a handful of rough-looking buildings, and a main street that seemed to simply end where civilization gave up trying. Lillian stepped onto the platform with her trunk and looked around at the dusty, wind-blown place that was nothing like Boston, nothing like anywhere she'd ever been. A few other passengers disembarked. Most were men, rough-looking types in work clothes and wide-brimmed hats. They moved with purpose, clearly belonging to this landscape in a way Lillian absolutely did not. She stood there, suddenly uncertain. Ethan Hale's last letter had said he'd meet her at the station, but the platform was chaos, people coming and going, and she had no idea what the man looked like. She'd been so focused on the practicalities of getting here that she hadn't thought about this moment, the actual meeting. Miss Moore? Lillian turned. The man standing before her was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. He wore work clothes, denim pants, a cotton shirt, a leather vest that had seen better years. His hat was in his hands, and his eyes, gray, she noticed, like storm clouds, watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. This was her husband, this stranger, this unknown quantity that she'd gambled her entire future on. Mr. Hale, her voice came out steadier than she felt. Ma'am, he nodded, an economical movement. Welcome to Wyoming. How was your journey? Long? I expect so. He glanced at her trunk. This all you brought? It's all I have. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity exactly, but understanding. I'll get it loaded. The wagon's just there. He moved to pick up her trunk, lifting it like it weighed nothing, and Lillian followed him across the dusty platform to where a wagon and 2 horses waited. The wagon was clean but old, the horses sturdy rather than elegant. Everything about the scene screamed practicality over appearance. Ethan loaded her trunk into the wagon bed, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hand was calloused when she took it, the grip strong and sure, and then she was settling onto the hard bench beside him. Ranch is about 2 hours north, he said, taking up the reins. We'll reach it before dark if we leave now. All right. He clicked to the horses and they started moving, leaving Rawlins behind. Lillian watched the town, such as it was, disappear and felt the last connection to her old life sever. There was no turning back now. Literally. The train had already departed, and the next one wouldn't come through for 3 days. They rode in silence for perhaps 20 minutes before Ethan spoke again. I should tell you some things. About the arrangement. All right. The house has 3 bedrooms. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't... He paused, seeming to choose words carefully. I won't expect anything from you that we haven't agreed to. This is a partnership, not anything else. Not unless you want it to be, sometime down the road. Lillian felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying ease slightly. Thank you for being clear. I've got 2 hands working the ranch, Pete and Tom. They're good men, respectful. They have their own quarters in the barn. We run about 500 head of cattle right now. I'm hoping to expand if the winter's not too harsh. He spoke about the ranch, the work, the rhythm of the seasons out here. Lillian listened, trying to absorb information about a life she couldn't yet picture. Cattle, branding, calving season, hay harvests. It was a foreign language, and she was going to have to learn it fluently. What about you? Ethan asked suddenly. The letters you wrote, they didn't say much about, well, about you. There wasn't much to say. My family lost everything. I had nowhere else to go. That's circumstances, not who you are. Lillian looked at him, surprised. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but she sensed genuine curiosity beneath the gruff exterior. I can read and write, she said finally. I can do figures. I was taught to run a household, though I suspect a ranch household is different than what I'm used to. I play piano, though I doubt that's useful here. I can sew well enough to mend clothes. I've never cooked a full meal in my life, but I'm willing to learn. Can you ride? A horse? No. You'll need to learn. Can't get around a ranch on foot. Then I'll learn. She met his eyes directly. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Hale. I just don't know how to do most of it yet. But I'll figure it out. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. And for what it's worth, I'm not expecting you to know everything. I'm just expecting you to try. I can promise you that much. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, less awkward, more like 2 people who'd successfully navigated the first difficult conversation of many to come. The landscape continued to change as they traveled. The mountains grew closer, more imposing. The prairie gave way to rolling hills covered in grass that whispered secrets in the wind. Lillian saw her first antelope, then a group of them, bounding across the distance with impossible grace. It's beautiful, she said softly, almost to herself. It is, Ethan agreed. It's also hard, unforgiving. The winters here will test you in ways Boston never did. I'm already being tested in ways Boston never did. He glanced at her, and she caught what might have been the ghost of a smile. I suppose that's true. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Lillian had never seen before, Ethan pointed ahead. There. That's the ranch. Lillian followed his gesture and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a valley between hills. There was a house, smaller than she'd imagined, wooden, with a porch wrapping around the front. A large barn, several outbuildings, fences marking pastures where cattle grazed. It looked real, solid, like a place where people actually lived and worked and built lives. It looked nothing like home. It looked like her future. The house isn't fancy, Ethan was saying, but it's sound. Good roof, wood stove, well with clean water. I built most of it myself, so I know every board. It looks fine, Lillian said, and meant it. They pulled up in front of the house as the light began to fade. Ethan jumped down, then turned to help Lillian descend. Her legs were shaky from hours of sitting, and she stumbled slightly. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy, takes a bit to get used to wagon travel. 2 men emerged from the barn, Pete and Tom, presumably. They were both young, early 20s maybe, and they studied Lillian with open curiosity as Ethan made introductions. Boys, this is Miss Moore. She'll be, He paused, and Lillian realized he was uncertain how to introduce her. She'll be my wife. After the ceremony tomorrow. Ma'am? They both nodded respectfully. Tomorrow? Lillian looked at Ethan. Preacher comes through town once a month. He's in Rawlins right now, staying at the boarding house. Figured we'd ride in tomorrow morning, make it legal. Unless you need more time? Did she need more time? To what? Prepare herself to marry a stranger? She'd had 5 days on a train to prepare. Another day wouldn't change anything. Tomorrow's fine. All right then. Ethan lifted her trunk from the wagon. I'll show you your room. Let you get settled. Pete's wife usually does the cooking when she comes by, but she's down with a cold, so I'm afraid you're stuck with my attempt at dinner. Fair warning, I can't cook worth a damn. Then we'll both be learning, Lillian said. Inside the house was simple but clean. Wood floors, plain furniture, everything functional rather than decorative. Ethan showed her to a bedroom that held a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and nothing else. Bathroom's down the hall. We've got running water, which is more than most ranches can say. There's a tub if you want to wash up, towels in the cupboard. I'll get dinner started, such as it is. He left her alone, and Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of this strange house. Wind against the windows, boots on wood floors, the distant lowing of cattle, sounds that were nothing like the Boston traffic and society parties and life she'd left behind. She opened her trunk and took out her mother's music box, setting it carefully on the dresser. When she wound it, Chopin filled the small room, achingly familiar. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger. Tomorrow she would become someone's wife. Tomorrow her old life would officially end, and this new one would officially begin. Lillian let the music play until it wound down. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and went to face whatever came next. Because that's what you did out here, apparently. You kept trying. Dinner was as bad as Ethan had warned. They sat at the kitchen table, a rough-hewn piece that looked handmade, and ate overcooked beef, undercooked potatoes, and bread that Ethan admitted he'd bought in town 3 days ago. It was borderline inedible, but Lillian ate it anyway because she was hungry and because complaining seemed like a poor way to start this arrangement. I'll learn to cook, she said, pushing a particularly tough piece of meat around her plate. It can't be harder than managing a household staff. It's different. Everything out here is different than what you're used to. I'm beginning to understand that. Ethan set down his fork and looked at her directly. Miss Moore? Lillian. If we're getting married tomorrow, you should probably call me Lillian. Lillian, then, and I'm Ethan. He paused. I want you to know that I understand this is strange for you, probably frightening too, though you're too proud to say so. I'm not frightened. The lie came automatically. You should be. You're 1,000 miles from everything you know, about to marry a man you just met. If you weren't at least a little frightened, you'd be foolish. His voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. But I meant what I said in my letters. You'll be safe here. I'll respect your boundaries. And if you decide this isn't what you want, if you want to leave, I'll pay for your passage back east. No questions asked. Lillian thought of Mr. Garrison's return ticket, hidden in her trunk. That's generous. It's practical. A partnership only works if both people want to be in it. And what do you want, Ethan? The question came out before she could stop it. Really? Because the letters talked about needing help with the ranch, but surely you could hire a housekeeper. Why a wife? Why this arrangement? He was quiet for a long moment, and Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. My first wife, Sarah, she died in winter. Influenza. I was out checking the herd during a storm, and by the time I got back, she was already gone. The doctor said she'd been sick for days, but she hadn't told me, didn't want me to worry. He stared at his plate. A housekeeper would have left her alone. A wife. A wife is supposed to be a partner, someone who's there, someone who cares enough to speak up, to not try to handle everything alone. I'm sorry for your loss. It was 2 years ago. I've made my peace with it mostly, but I realized I don't want to do this alone anymore. The ranch, the life, it's too big for one person. He met her eyes. I'm not looking to replace Sarah. I'm looking for something different, a new partnership. One built on honesty instead of romance, on respect instead of passion. Does that make sense? More sense than anything else about this situation, Lillian admitted. Tomorrow morning, we'll ride into town and make this official. After that, we'll figure out the rest as we go. One day at a time. One day at a time, Lillian repeated. It seemed like a reasonable plan, given that anything longer term felt overwhelming. They finished the terrible dinner in silence, and then Lillian helped wash the dishes. Another task she'd never done in her old life, but which seemed straightforward enough. Ethan showed her how to work the pump for water, where to find the soap, how to stack the clean plates. It was such a small thing, washing dishes together. But as they stood side by side at the sink, the wind howling outside and the lamplight casting warm shadows across the kitchen, Lillian felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe she could build a life here. Maybe choosing survival over security had been the right decision after all. The preacher married them in the front room of the Rollins boarding house at 10 o'clock the following morning. Lillian wore the same traveling dress she'd arrived in, dark blue wool, practical and plain. She'd pinned her hair up carefully, applied no rouge or powder because she had none, and stood before a man she'd known for less than 24 hours while another man she'd never met read from a worn Bible about duty and partnership and cleaving together until death. Ethan wore what appeared to be his only suit, black, slightly too tight across the shoulders, smelling faintly of cedar from whatever trunk he'd stored it in. His hair was freshly cut, his face clean-shaven for the first time since she'd met him, and when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady even though hers shook. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The preacher closed his book with an air of satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Hale." Ethan hesitated, his eyes meeting Lillian's in a silent question. She gave the smallest nod, and he leaned forward, pressing his lips briefly to her forehead, chaste, respectful, nothing like the passionate embrace she'd imagined at her wedding when she was a girl dreaming of romance. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale." The preacher shook Ethan's hand, then hers. "May you build a good life together." Mrs. Hale. Lillian tested the name in her mind as they signed the marriage certificate, as Ethan paid the preacher, as they walked back out into the cold Wyoming morning. She was married, legally bound to a stranger. The thing she'd agreed to in desperation had actually happened, and there was no undoing it now. "You hungry?" Ethan asked as they reached the wagon. "There's a restaurant here that serves decent food. We could get lunch before heading back." "That would be nice." They ate at a small establishment that served steak and potatoes, and Lillian watched her new husband across the table, trying to learn him. He ate methodically, didn't speak unless spoken to, and kept his eyes on his plate except when answering her questions. He wasn't unfriendly exactly, but he carried himself like a man unused to conversation, to company, to having someone else around. The ranch hands, Pete and Tom, they seem young, Lillian ventured. "Pete's 24, Tom's 22. They're brothers, came out here 3 years ago looking for work. Good with cattle, hard workers. They'll help you if you need anything while I'm out on the range." "How often are you out on the range?" "Depends on the season. Winter, I'm closer to the house, checking on the herd, making sure they're weathering the cold. Spring and fall are busiest, calving, branding, moving cattle. Summer, I'm often gone for days at a time during drives." Days at a time, alone in that house. Lillian absorbed this information, adding it to the growing list of things she needed to understand about this new life. "What will I do?" she asked. "Day to day, I mean. What needs doing?" Ethan considered this, chewing thoughtfully. "Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, garden in the summer, though that's months off yet. Chickens need tending. We've got about 20 hens. Pete's wife, Mary, she usually helps with the heavy cleaning and laundry when she's well. She'll teach you what you need to know." "Mary, Pete's wife. You mentioned she was sick?" "Just a cold. She'll be around in a few days, I expect. Good woman. You'll like her." They finished their meal in silence, and Lillian found herself studying the other diners. Rough men in work clothes, a few women who looked weathered by sun and wind, everyone moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that spoke to hard lives and little time for leisure. This was her world now. These were her people, though they didn't know it yet. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Lillian watched the landscape roll past and tried not to think about the fact that she was now legally bound to the silent man beside her. That tonight she would sleep under the same roof as her husband, this stranger, and begin the work of building a life with someone she didn't know at all. When they arrived, Pete and Tom were working in the corral, and they looked up as the wagon approached. Pete removed his hat, nodding respectfully. "Congratulations, boss, ma'am." "Thank you." Lillian said, testing out her new role. Please call me Lillian. Yes, ma'am. But she could tell he wouldn't, at least not for a while. Out here, there were proprieties even in the midst of rough living. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, and as her feet touched the ground, the reality crashed over her fully. This was home now. This ranch, this valley, these mountains in the distance. Everything she'd known was gone, and this was what remained. I'll show you around properly, Ethan said, seeming to sense her disorientation. You should know the layout, know where everything is. He walked her through the property, pointing out the chicken coop, the root cellar, the barn where Pete and Tom had their quarters, the pastures where the cattle grazed. He showed her the well, the woodpile, the small smokehouse where they cured meat. Everything was neat, organized, functional, a working ranch, not a showpiece. The mountains there, Ethan pointed north. That's the Wind River Range. Beautiful in summer, deadly in winter. You never go out when a storm's coming from that direction, understand? The snow can come down so fast you lose your bearings in minutes. I understand. And this, he led her to a small fenced area behind the house, was Sarah's garden. I haven't touched it since she died. If you want to plant something come spring, it's yours. Lillian looked at the overgrown plot, imagining the woman who'd tended it. Ethan's first wife, the one he'd loved enough to marry for romance instead of practicality. Did you love her very much? The question escaped before she could stop it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Yes, but that was a different kind of marriage than ours. Don't compare yourself to her, Lillian. This arrangement, what we've agreed to, it's honest. Maybe more honest than what I had before. How so? Because we both know what we're getting into. No illusions, no expectations beyond partnership. Sometimes I think that's kinder than promising forever to someone and then having forever stolen away. Lillian didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded, and they continued the tour in silence. That night, after a dinner that was marginally better than the previous evening's disaster, Ethan showed Lillian where he kept the household accounts. Sarah used to manage these, he said, pulling a ledger from a drawer in the small desk. Tracked expenses, recorded what we earned from cattle sales, kept everything organized. I've been doing it myself, but I'm not good at it. Numbers aren't my strength. Lillian opened the ledger and scanned the entries. His handwriting was clear enough, but the organization was chaotic. Expenses and income mixed together, no clear categories, dates sometimes missing entirely. I can fix this, she said. I managed my father's household accounts for 2 years before everything fell apart. I can organize this properly. That would help. Ethan looked relieved. I'll show you how everything works, what we spend on feed, what the cattle bring in, what the hands cost. You should know the full picture of the ranch finances. They spent an hour going through the numbers, and Lillian found herself genuinely interested. The ranch was profitable, but not hugely so. Ethan was conservative with expenses, saved where he could, and reinvested most of the profit back into expanding the herd. It was sound management, just poorly documented. You've built something solid here, she said, closing the ledger. We've built something solid, he corrected. As of this morning, it's as much yours as mine. That's what partnership means. The words should have comforted her, but instead they felt heavy. Responsibility, ownership, stakes in a life she hadn't chosen so much as defaulted into. When they finally said goodnight, Ethan paused outside her bedroom door. If you need anything, I'm just down the hall. And Lillian, thank you for coming here, for taking a chance on this. I didn't have much choice. You had the choice to give up. You didn't. That counts for something. He left her then, and Lillian closed her door, leaning against it as she listened to his footsteps retreat to his own room. The house settled around her, creaking and sighing in the wind, and she changed into her nightgown, feeling more alone than she had since her father died. This was her wedding night, and she was spending it alone in a stranger's house, married to a man who slept down the hall and promised nothing but respect and distance. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt untethered, floating in a life that didn't quite fit yet. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was equal parts strange and oddly comforting. Lillian woke each morning to the sound of Ethan moving around the kitchen, making coffee, starting the fire in the stove. She'd dress quickly and join him, and together they'd piece together a breakfast. Eggs from the chickens she was learning to tend, bread that got better each time she tried baking it, coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. "You're getting better at the cooking," Ethan said one morning, 4 days into their marriage. The bar was extraordinarily low. He smiled at that, a real smile that changed his whole face, and Lillian felt something shift between them. Not romance exactly, but the beginning of ease. The awkwardness of those first days was fading into something more comfortable. After breakfast, Ethan would head out to work, and Lillian would tackle the house. Cleaning was straightforward enough. Sweep, dust, wash. The cooking was harder, but she was learning through trial and error. The chickens had been terrifying at first, but she'd discovered that if she moved slowly and spoke softly, they mostly ignored her while she collected eggs. Pete's wife, Mary, appeared on the 5th day, a small woman with capable hands and a warm smile. "So you're the one who finally got Ethan to marry again." Mary looked Lillian over with frank curiosity. "Everyone in the valley's been talking about it. Mail order bride, they're saying. That true?" "Yes." Lillian saw no point in lying. "Practical man, Ethan is. I told Pete he'd find himself a wife this way eventually. Couldn't see him courting anyone after Sarah." Mary started pulling cleaning supplies from a cupboard with the ease of long familiarity. "You know how to run a ranch house?" "Not even slightly." "Well, then let's fix that. Can't have you floundering when winter really hits. Come on, I'll teach you everything Sarah taught me." Over the next several hours, Mary showed Lillian how to properly clean the wood stove, how to manage the laundry using the big copper basin in the back room, how to organize the root cellar so nothing spoiled, how to mend work clothes that took a beating from ranch life. She talked constantly, filling Lillian in on valley gossip, explaining the rhythms of ranch work, sharing stories about Sarah without any apparent jealousy or resentment. "Sarah was a good woman," Mary said while showing Lillian how to properly black the stove. "Knew ranch life inside and out because she was born to it. You, though, you're different. City girl, right?" "Boston. Long way from Boston to here. Takes guts to make that kind of change." Mary studied her. "You regretting it yet?" Lillian considered lying, then decided honesty served her better. "I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months." "Fair enough. But I'll tell you this. Ethan's a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself, but he's fair and he's kind. You could have done a lot worse in a husband, arranged or not." "What was Sarah like?" "Strong, practical. Loved this ranch almost as much as Ethan did. When she died, it broke something in him. Took him a year before he'd even talk about her without leaving the room." Mary paused in her scrubbing. "He tell you how she died?" "Influenza, during a storm." "Did he tell you he blamed himself? Thought if he'd been here instead of out with the cattle, he could have saved her. Doctors said there was nothing to be done, that she was too far gone by the time anyone could have helped. But Ethan didn't believe it. Still doesn't, I think." Lillian absorbed this, understanding Ethan a little better. The distance he kept, the careful boundaries, they weren't just about respecting her, they were about protecting himself from loss. "Thanks for telling me," she said. "You're his wife now. You should know who you married." Mary stood, surveying their work. "Come on, I'll show you how to make proper bread. That stuff you've been turning out is barely edible." By the end of the day, Lillian's hands were raw from scrubbing and her back ached from bending over the wash basin. But she'd learned more about ranch life than she'd picked up in the previous 5 days combined. When Ethan came in for dinner, he stopped short at the sight of actual bread. Golden, properly risen, steaming from the oven. "Mary was here," Lillian explained. "I can tell." He broke off a piece of bread, tasted it, and nodded approval. "This is real food. Don't sound so surprised." "After what I've been eating for 2 years, I'm allowed to be surprised." They ate dinner together, and for the first time, conversation came naturally. Ethan told her about his day, a fence that needed mending, a cow showing signs of illness, plans for expanding one of the pastures. Lillian shared what she'd learned from Mary, the valley gossip, her triumph over the bread. "Valley's talking about us, you know," Ethan said, pouring more coffee. "Curious about the city girl who married the hermit rancher." "They think you're a hermit?" "I don't exactly socialize much. Haven't since Sarah died." He met her eyes. "Might change now. People will expect us to attend church socials, community gatherings. You all right with that? Playing the role of dutiful ranch wife?" Lillian smiled slightly. "I suppose I should meet our neighbors eventually. They'll judge you. Fair warning." Valley folks can be, he searched for the word. Traditional. They'll wonder why I didn't marry a ranch girl, someone who knows the life. And what will you tell them? The truth. That I wrote to an agency, that you answered, that we made an arrangement that suits us both. He paused. Unless you'd rather I didn't. Lillian thought about it. She could ask him to lie, to pretend this was a love match, to save face. But Mary's words echoed in her mind. This partnership was built on honesty. Tell them the truth, she said. Let them think what they will. I didn't come here to impress anyone. Good, because you won't. But he said it with that small smile she was learning meant approval. The second week brought snow. Lillian woke to a world transformed, white and silent and impossibly beautiful. She stood at the kitchen window watching flakes drift down from a gray sky and felt something close to wonder. First snow of the season, Ethan said, coming to stand beside her. Won't stick long, probably, but by December we'll be buried in it. How much snow? Feet of it. Sometimes the drifts get so high you can't see the fence posts. We'll be snowed in for weeks at a time. The idea should have been frightening, but instead Lillian felt oddly excited. Snowed in meant no expectations, no social calls, just her and Ethan and the work of survival. Simple, clear. I'll need to teach you to ride before the heavy snows come, Ethan continued. Can't have you trapped in the house all winter. You need to be able to get around the property, check on things if I'm out with the herd. Today? He looked at her, surprised. You want to start today? Why not? The snow's light, and I have to learn sometime. An hour later, Lillian found herself in the corral, facing a horse that looked far too large and far too skeptical of her abilities. This is Dancer, Ethan said, stroking the mare's neck. She's gentle, patient, good horse for learning. She's enormous. She's average. You'll get used to it. He showed her how to approach, how to touch, how to read the horse's body language. Animals can sense fear. You need to be calm, confident. Let her know you're in charge. I'm not in charge. I have no idea what I'm doing. Then fake it. He handed her the reins. Confidence first, competence later. That's how you learn anything worth knowing. Lillian took the reins, felt the weight of them, the connection to the massive animal in front of her. Dancer snorted, tossing her head, and Lillian fought the urge to step back. Good, Ethan said quietly. Now I'm going to help you mount. Left foot in the stirrup, swing your right leg over. I'll boost you up. Getting onto the horse was ungainly and embarrassing, but finally Lillian found herself sitting in the saddle, the ground impossibly far below, her hands gripping the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Relax. Ethan's hand rested on her knee, steadying. You're too tense. The horse can feel it. I'm terrified. I know, but you're doing it anyway. That's braver than not being scared at all. He talked her through the basics, how to sit, how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse to move. Dancer walked slowly around the corral while Ethan led her, and Lillian focused on breathing, on not falling, on the strange sensation of moving in rhythm with an animal. By the time they finished, her legs were shaking and her hands cramped from gripping too hard, but she'd stayed on. She'd ridden a horse. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. You did well, Ethan said, helping her dismount. Tomorrow we'll do it again, and the day after that, until it feels natural. Will it ever feel natural? Eventually. Give it time. Time. They had that at least. A whole winter stretching ahead of them, all those long, dark months to learn each other, to build something resembling a partnership. That night, as Lillian soaked her sore muscles in a hot bath, she realized she was starting to feel something unexpected about this strange new life. Curiosity. She wanted to know what came next, wanted to see if she could master riding, cooking, ranch life, wanted to understand the quiet man she'd married, to map the contours of his silences and rare smiles. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was the first stirring of something that might grow into contentment, given time and patience. The days blended together, each one slightly easier than the last. Lillian's hands developed calluses from work. Her breath improved. Her riding became less terrifying, though she still held the reins too tight and gasped when Dancer moved faster than a walk. Ethan remained quiet but present, teaching her ranch skills with patient efficiency. He showed her how to stack wood properly for the winter, how to tell if a chicken was healthy, how to read the sky for coming weather. He corrected her mistakes without judgment, praised her successes without exaggeration, and maintained the careful distance they'd agreed upon. Separate rooms, separate lives that ran parallel but never quite touched, except they did touch, in small ways. His hand on her elbow when she stumbled over uneven ground, her fingers brushing his when they both reached for the coffee pot. The way they'd started finishing each other's thoughts about ranch business, that unspoken communication that develops between people who work closely together. 3 weeks into the marriage, they attended their first church social. The community gathered in a small building that served as both church and meeting hall, and Lillian felt every eye turn to assess her as she entered beside Ethan. Women whispered behind hands, men nodded cautiously, children stared with open curiosity. "Ethan Hale," a woman in her 50s approached, all warm smile and sharp eyes. "And this must be your new bride. We've all been dying to meet her." "Mrs. Patterson, this is my wife, Lillian. Lillian, Mrs. Patterson runs the valley like a general runs an army." "I simply keep everyone organized," Mrs. Patterson said, but her smile suggested she enjoyed the comparison. "Welcome to the valley, Mrs. Hale. Boston, is it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Long journey. Are you settling in well?" It was a simple question loaded with meaning. Lillian could feel the weight of community judgment, the unspoken questions about why a Boston woman would marry a Wyoming rancher through correspondence. "Very well, thank you. Everyone has been kind. Well, ranching is hard work for women who were born to it. Can't imagine what it's like for someone from the city." Mrs. Patterson's tone was sympathetic, but the implication was clear. "You don't belong here." "I'm learning," Lillian said evenly. "Ethan is an excellent teacher." "I'm sure he is." Mrs. Patterson's attention shifted to Ethan. "Sarah would be glad to know you've moved forward, Ethan. No one should be alone." Something flickered across Ethan's face, but his voice remained steady. "No, ma'am. They shouldn't." The afternoon was a trial of polite conversation and careful assessment. Women asked Lillian about her background, her skills, her plans. Men talked to Ethan about cattle and weather while stealing glances at his unlikely bride. Through it all, Lillian maintained perfect composure, that society training proving useful after all. On the ride home, Ethan was quiet until they'd left the town behind. "You handled that well," he said finally. "I've survived worse social gatherings. They'll gossip about how I married beneath my station or you married beneath yours, or how it can't possibly last. Let them gossip. We know what this is." He glanced at her, something like respect in his eyes. "We do, don't we? A partnership, an arrangement. It works because we're honest about it." "And does it work?" The question was careful, genuine. "Be honest with me, Lillian. Are you managing all right out here?" She thought about lying, about maintaining the brave face she showed everyone. But he'd asked for honesty, and that's what their marriage was built on. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted. "Some days I wake up and forget where I am, and then I remember I'm 1,000 miles from everything I knew. But other days, I look at the mountains and feel something like peace. I'm learning to find the rhythm of this life. It's not what I expected, but it's not terrible either. That's about as good as I could hope for." "What about you?" She turned the question back on him. "Are you managing all right? With having someone in your space again?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, the horse's hooves crunching through snow the only sound. "It's strange," he said finally. "Having someone at breakfast, coming home to a warm house and hot food, hearing another voice. But it's not bad strange, just different. I'd gotten used to being alone. Sometimes I think I'd forgotten what partnership felt like. And now that you remember? Now I think maybe being alone wasn't as good as I'd convinced myself it was." They didn't speak more about it, but something had shifted between them. Not romance. Neither of them was ready for that, might never be ready for that. But understanding, recognition that they were both damaged people trying to build something functional from the pieces of broken lives. That night, Lillian sat at the desk organizing the ranch accounts, and Ethan worked on mending a saddle in the chair by the fire. Neither spoke, but the silence felt comfortable, companionable even. This was partnership, she realized. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but simply existing in the same space without discomfort. It was more than she'd expected when she boarded that train in Boston. And as the wind howled outside and snow began falling again, Lillian allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice after all. December arrived with the cold that Lillian had never experienced in her life. The kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals in the air, that made metal burn to touch, that seeped through layers of wool and flannel to settle in your bones. Ethan had warned her, but warnings couldn't prepare you for the reality of Wyoming winter. "Storm's coming," he said one morning at breakfast, his eyes on the northern sky. "Big one by the look of it. We need to move the cattle closer to the barn, get them near shelter before it hits." Lillian followed his gaze out the window. The sky looked bruised, purple-gray clouds building over the mountains like an approaching army. The wind had shifted too, coming from the north with a bite that promised violence. "How long do we have?" 6 hours, maybe 8 if we're lucky. Ethan was already standing, reaching for his heavy coat. "I'm taking Pete and Tom out to start moving them. You stay inside, keep the fires going, and if the storm hits before we're back, don't come looking for us, understand?" "I understand." But as she watched him ride out with the 2 hands, something unsettled coiled in her stomach. The sky continued to darken, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows with increasing fury. Lillian moved through the house, stoking fires, checking supplies, doing all the things Mary had taught her to do when bad weather threatened. 2 hours passed. Then 3. The first snowflakes began to fall, fat and heavy, and within minutes the world outside turned white. Lillian stood at the window, straining to see any sign of the men, but visibility dropped to nothing as the storm descended with shocking speed. 4 hours. 5. The wind screamed now, a constant howl that made the house groan and shudder. Snow piled against the windows, and Lillian added more wood to the stove, her hands shaking slightly. They should be back by now. Even if the cattle had been difficult to move, even if they'd had trouble, they should be back. Unless something had gone wrong. She tried to push the thought away, but it persisted. Men died in storms like this, got turned around, lost their bearings, froze to death within yards of safety. Sarah had died while Ethan was out in a storm, and the bitter irony of history repeating itself made Lillian's chest tight with something that felt uncomfortably like fear. Not fear for herself. Fear for him. When had that happened? When had the quiet stranger she'd married become someone she worried about? 6 hours into the storm, she heard it. A sound that cut through the wind. Cattle lowing, close to the house, and then the barn door banging. Lillian grabbed her coat and fought her way to the window, wiping away condensation to peer out. Through the swirling white, she could just make out shapes moving near the barn. They were back. They'd made it. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she had to grip the windowsill to steady herself. But the relief was short-lived. The kitchen door burst open and Pete stumbled in, his face raw from wind and cold, ice crusting his eyebrows. "Mrs. Hale, we've got trouble. Some of the cattle broke off from the main herd, headed east toward the ravine. Boss went after them with Tom, told me to bring the rest in. That was an hour ago, and they're not back yet." The ravine. Lillian had ridden past it during her lessons with Ethan, a deep cut in the earth where cattle could fall and break legs, where a man on horseback could lose his footing in good weather, let alone in a blizzard. How many cattle? Maybe 20 head, but in this weather, they could be anywhere by now, and if they went over the edge— Pete didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Lillian's mind raced. Ethan and Tom were out there, in conditions that were rapidly becoming lethal, trying to save cattle that might already be lost. The smart thing, the sensible thing, would be to wait. To trust that 2 experienced ranchers could handle themselves, that they'd hole up somewhere and wait out the storm. But Sarah had died while Ethan was out in a storm, and Lillian was suddenly, absolutely certain that she would not let that happen again. Not to him, not because of her standing safe in a warm house while he risked himself for livestock. "Saddle dancer," she heard herself say. Pete stared at her. "Ma'am?" "Saddle my horse. I'm going after them." "Mrs. Hale, with respect, you can't ride well enough to I can ride well enough to follow your trail in the snow. And 2 people searching have better odds than 1. Now saddle the horse, or I'll do it myself and waste time we don't have." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because Pete nodded and headed back out into the storm. Lillian grabbed every piece of warm clothing she owned, layering herself until she could barely move. She found rope in the mudroom, tied one end around her waist. If she got lost, at least they'd find her body, she thought with dark humor. She tucked matches and a knife into her pockets, grabbed a lantern, and met Pete at the barn. Dancer looked at her with what Lillian swore was reproach, but the mare stood steady while Pete helped her mount. The saddle felt different with so many layers of clothing, and the wind immediately tried to tear her from the horse's back, but Lillian gripped tight and pointed Dancer toward the east. "Follow the fence line," Pete shouted over the wind. "It'll take you toward the ravine. And Mrs. Hale, don't be a hero. If you can't find them quick, you turn back. Boss would never forgive me if something happened to you." Lillian nodded and urged Dancer forward. The world disappeared into white chaos. Snow drove into her face with stinging force, and within minutes Lillian lost all sense of direction. Only the fence posts appearing like ghosts every few yards kept her oriented. She called out for Ethan, for Tom, but the wind snatched her voice away before it could travel more than a few feet. Dancer plodded forward with the steady patience of a horse who'd weathered worse storms than this, and Lillian trusted her completely. They moved through what felt like an endless white void, and Lillian's fear grew with each passing minute. What if she was going the wrong direction? What if they'd already made it back and she was out here for nothing? What if she got them both killed in some dramatic but ultimately stupid attempt at heroism? But she kept going because the alternative was turning back, and she couldn't do that. Not when Ethan might need help. The fence line ended abruptly where the ravine cut across the property, and Lillian pulled Dancer to a halt, her heart pounding. She could hear cattle now, that panicked lowing that meant distress, and somewhere below came a man's voice, shouting something she couldn't make out. Lillian dismounted, tied Dancer to the last fence post, and moved carefully toward the edge of the ravine. The drop was steep, treacherous, and in the storm she could barely see 10 feet ahead. But then lightning cracked overhead. Lightning in a snowstorm, she'd learned, meant the weather was truly dangerous, and in that flash of illumination she saw them. 20 feet down the ravine slope, Tom was trying to control his spooked horse while Ethan worked to free a steer whose leg was wedged between rocks. Even from this distance, Lillian could see that Ethan was favoring his left side, moving stiffly, and her stomach dropped. He was hurt. "Ethan!" She screamed his name with everything she had. His head jerked up, and even through the snow she could see his shock. He shouted something back, but she couldn't hear it. She needed to get down there, but the slope was treacherous and she had no experience with this kind of terrain. Do it anyway, she thought. Confidence first, competence later. Lillian started down the slope, half sliding, half climbing, using scrub brush and rocks for handholds. Twice she nearly lost her footing, and once she slid several feet before catching herself. But she kept going, driven by the sight of Ethan struggling with that steer, by the knowledge that Tom couldn't help because his horse was about to bolt. She reached the bottom with her hands bleeding through her gloves and her breath coming in ragged gasps. Ethan grabbed her arm, steadying her, and she could see the anger and fear warring in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing out here?" He had to shout directly in her ear for her to hear him. "Saving your stubborn hide. Are you hurt?" "Cracked rib, maybe. Doesn't matter. We need to free this steer and get everyone back up the slope before—" The rest of his sentence was lost as Tom's horse finally did bolt, scrambling up the slope and disappearing into the white. Tom swore viciously, fighting to keep his own footing on the icy ground. "Can you help me with this?" Ethan was already turning back to the steer, and Lillian moved to his side without hesitation. The animal was wedged tight, one leg caught at an angle that would break it if they pulled wrong. Ethan explained what they needed to do: lift and twist simultaneously, free the leg without causing more damage. It required strength and coordination and trust that the other person knew what they were doing. Lillian had no idea what she was doing, but she followed Ethan's instructions exactly, gripping where he told her to grip, pulling when he said pull, and together they managed to free the steer. The animal scrambled up and away, limping but mobile, heading back toward the herd with that single-minded determination cattle had for survival. "Now we need to get out of here," Ethan said. But as he tried to move, his face went white and he stumbled. Lillian caught him, feeling him lean more weight on her than he wanted to. "How bad is it, really?" "Bad enough. I can't climb that slope, Lillian. Not quickly. You and Tom need to go back. Send Pete with—" "We're not leaving you." Her voice was absolute. "Tom, help me get him to level ground. We'll walk back along the ravine floor until we find an easier slope." "Mrs. Hale, the ravine runs for miles, and in this storm—" "Then we better start walking." They moved as a unit, Tom on one side of Ethan and Lillian on the other, supporting his weight as he tried to keep moving. The cold was brutal now, that bone-deep cold that made thinking difficult. Lillian focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping Ethan upright, on watching for any break in the ravine walls that might offer an easier exit. Time lost meaning. They could have been walking for minutes or hours. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and Lillian felt her own strength beginning to flag. Her legs shook with exhaustion, her hands had gone numb, and she couldn't feel her feet anymore. But she kept going. They all kept going, because the alternative was stopping, and stopping meant dying. "There!" Tom's shout brought her head up. Ahead, barely visible, was a section where the ravine wall had partially collapsed, creating a rough slope up to level ground. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. Getting Ethan up that slope was the hardest thing Lillian had ever done. He tried to help, tried to take his own weight, but she could see the pain in every movement. Tom went first, then reached back to pull while Lillian pushed from behind, and somehow, impossibly, they got him to the top. Once on level ground, Lillian tried to get her bearings. The fence line should be north, the house beyond that, but in the white chaos, she couldn't tell which direction was which. For a terrifying moment, she thought they'd escape the ravine only to die lost on their own property. Then she heard it. A horse's whinny. Dancer still tied where Lillian had left her, calling out through the storm. "This way!" Lillian grabbed Ethan's arm, and they struggled toward the sound. Finding Dancer felt like a miracle, and the horse's solid presence in the chaos was the most beautiful thing Lillian had ever seen. "Tom, you take the boss," Lillian said. "I'll walk alongside." "You can't walk in this, you need to ride. The horse can't carry us both, and he's hurt worse than I am. Just go. Follow the fence line back. I'll be right behind you." Tom hesitated, but Ethan was fading fast. His breathing labored, and there was no time for argument. Tom hauled Ethan up onto Dancer, then mounted behind him, holding him steady in the saddle. "Don't stop," Ethan managed, looking down at Lillian. "Keep moving. If you stop, you freeze." "I know. Go." They disappeared into the white, and Lillian was alone. She started walking, one hand on the fence line, using the posts as guideposts in the chaos. The cold was overwhelming now, a living thing that wanted to drag her down, to make her sleep. Her body screamed at her to stop, to rest, just for a moment. But she heard Ethan's voice in her head. "If you stop, you freeze." And she kept moving. One post. Another. Then another. She counted them, gave each one a number, made a game of it to keep her mind working. 27, 28, 29. How many posts between the ravine and the barn? She couldn't remember. Had she passed this one before? Was she going in circles? 53, 54. Her legs gave out at post 62. Lillian went down hard, her knees hitting frozen ground, and for a long moment she couldn't make herself get up. The snow was actually warm where she lay, and that seemed wrong, but she was too tired to figure out why. Maybe she'd just rest here, just for a minute. "Lillian!" The voice was distant, barely audible over the wind, but it pulled at her. Someone was calling her name. Someone needed her to get up. "Lillian, answer me!" Ethan. That was Ethan's voice, and he sounded afraid. She'd never heard him sound afraid before. She tried to answer, but her mouth wouldn't work properly. Tried to move, but her limbs were so heavy. Managed to lift one hand, waving it weakly in what she hoped was a visible gesture. Then there were hands on her, lifting her, and Pete's face swam into view. "I've got you, Mrs. Hale. Just hold on." He carried her. Actually lifted her like she weighed nothing, and carried her through the storm. The world tilted and swayed, and Lillian closed her eyes against the dizziness. When she opened them again, they were in the barn, warmth and lamplight surrounding her. "Get her inside the house," Ethan's voice rough with pain. Mary, help her. Pete, ride for the doctor. Can't get a doctor in this weather, boss. Then we do what we can ourselves. Lillian was vaguely aware of being moved again, of Mary's capable hands removing her frozen clothes, of being wrapped in blankets and placed near the stove. Hot liquid was pressed to her lips, coffee or tea, she couldn't tell, and she drank automatically. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned to her extremities. Her hands and feet burned as circulation restored, and she bit back whimpers at the pain. Mary worked methodically, checking for frostbite, rubbing warmth back into Lillian's limbs, talking in a low, soothing voice. "You damn fool woman," Mary said, but there was affection in it. "Going out in that storm. What were you thinking?" "That I couldn't lose him." The words came out before Lillian could stop them. Mary's hand stilled for a moment, then continued their work. "Well, you didn't, though you nearly lost yourself in the saving. Men have died in less severe storms than that one." "How is he?" "Ethan?" "Cracked rib for certain, maybe two. Bruised all to hell, but alive, thanks to you." Mary wrapped another blanket around Lillian's shoulders. "He's in his room, insisting he's fine while Tom wraps his ribs. Stubborn man. I want to see him. You can barely stand." "I don't care. I need to see him." Mary helped her to her feet, and Lillian made her way down the hall on shaking legs. Ethan's door was open, and she could see him sitting on the edge of his bed while Tom wrapped bandages around his torso. His face was pale, jaw tight with pain, but when he looked up and saw her, something in his expression shifted. "You made it back." His voice was rough. "So did you." "Lillian?" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "What you did out there, you could have died. Should have died, probably. You can barely ride in good weather, let alone in a blizzard." "I couldn't just stay here safe while you were out there." "Why not?" "That was the arrangement. That was what we agreed to." "Because the arrangement changed." The words burst out of her, sharp and honest. "Because somewhere between Boston and here, between strangers and partnership, something changed, and I realized I care whether you live or die, Ethan Hale. I care what happens to you, and I wasn't going to stand in this house wondering if you'd freeze to death in that ravine while I did nothing." The silence that followed was broken only by Tom clearing his throat uncomfortably. "I'll just give you two some privacy." He slipped past Lillian and disappeared down the hall. Ethan stood slowly, wincing at the movement, and crossed to where Lillian stood swaying in the doorway. He reached out, his hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "You rode out into a blizzard," he said quietly. "Climbed down a ravine. Helped free a steer. Got me to safety. All things you didn't know how to do 2 months ago. I learned. You did more than learn. You proved you're not some fragile city girl playing at ranch life. You're—" He paused, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You're extraordinary, Lillian Moore." "Lillian Hale," she corrected softly. "I'm your wife, remember? Even if it's just an arrangement." "Is that all it is?" His eyes searched hers. "Still just an arrangement?" Lillian's heart pounded. They were treading on dangerous ground now, stepping beyond the careful boundaries they'd established. But after tonight, after nearly losing him, she couldn't pretend those boundaries still held. "I don't know what it is," she admitted, "but it's not just an arrangement anymore. Not for me." Ethan's hand slid from her face to the back of her neck, and he rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Not for me either," he said. "Not for a while now, if I'm being honest." They stood like that, not quite embracing, but closer than they'd ever been, and Lillian felt something fundamental shift between them. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever in the traditional sense, but connection, recognition, the understanding that they'd moved past transaction into something real. "You should rest," Ethan said finally, though he made no move to step back. "You're exhausted. So are you." "My room or yours?" The question was careful, not an assumption, but an offer. Lillian thought about the careful distance they'd maintained, separate rooms and separate lives. Thought about how that distance had felt safe, but also lonely. Thought about nearly dying tonight and realizing that life was too short to spend it hiding from possibilities. "Yours," she said. If that's all right. More than all right. They settled into his bed together, both still dressed, both too exhausted for anything beyond simple proximity. Ethan's arm came around her carefully, mindful of his ribs, and Lillian curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. The fit was awkward at first, unfamiliar, but they adjusted until it felt natural. "Thank you," Ethan said into the darkness, "for coming after me, for risking yourself, for caring enough to try. Thank you for teaching me to ride, for being patient, for building something I could choose to fight for." His hand found hers beneath the blankets, fingers interlacing, and they fell asleep like that. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something more, bound together by choice and circumstance, and the recognition that partnership could be its own kind of love. The storm raged outside, but inside they were warm and safe, and for the first time since saying their vows, truly together. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed by snow. Lillian woke to find Ethan already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I got kicked by a horse, but alive." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "How about you?" "Everything hurts, but I'll survive." "You'll do more than survive. You'll thrive." He said it with certainty, as if it were simple fact. "You proved that last night." They rose slowly, both moving like the injured people they were, and made their way to the kitchen. Mary had breakfast waiting, and Pete and Tom hovered nearby, concern written on their faces. "All the cattle accounted for?" Ethan asked. "Yes, boss. Lost 3 to the ravine, but the rest made it through. Could have been much worse." "Could have been catastrophic without Mrs. Hale," Tom added. "She saved our asses, pardon my language, ma'am." Language pardoned. Lillian accepted coffee from Mary. "Are the roads clear enough for Pete to try for the doctor?" "Won't need one," Ethan said. "Ribs will heal on their own. Done it before." "You're still getting checked," Lillian said firmly. "When the road's clear, we're getting a doctor out here. No arguments." Pete and Tom exchanged glances, and Mary smiled into her coffee. Ethan opened his mouth, clearly ready to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Yes, ma'am," he said instead, and Lillian caught the approval in his tone. The days following the storm were quiet ones, both of them recovering while the ranch settled back into winter routine. But something fundamental had changed between them. They still maintained separate rooms. Ethan insisted his tossing and turning with the injured ribs would keep her awake. But there was a new ease in how they moved around each other, casual touches that had been carefully avoided before, conversations that went deeper than ranch business. "Tell me about Boston," Ethan said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Your real life there, before everything fell apart." So Lillian told him about the house where she'd grown up, the parties and social calls, her mother's love of music and her father's terrible jokes, about Catherine and the other girls she'd thought were friends, about the slow realization that her entire world had been built on money and status, and when those disappeared, so did everything else. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Sometimes I miss the comfort of it, the predictability. But the people? The life?" She shook her head. "No. That world only wanted me when I was valuable to it. Out here, I have value because of what I can do, not who I was born to be. I think I prefer that." "What you did in that storm," Ethan shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. "That took a kind of courage I didn't know you had. Hell, that I didn't know anyone had. You were terrified. I could see it, but you did it anyway." "I learned that from you." She met his eyes. "Every day watching you face hard things without complaint, teaching me to ride even though I was hopeless at first. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs doing despite it." "When did you get so wise?" "When I married a cowboy who believed I could be more than I thought I was." Something passed between them in that moment, unspoken but understood. They were building something real here, something neither had expected but both were choosing, not the passionate romance of storybooks, but something steadier, deeper, more honest. That night, when Lillian paused outside her bedroom door, Ethan was there. "Your room or mine?" he asked, echoing the question from the night of the storm. "Yours," she said again, and this time it felt less like seeking comfort and more like coming home. They were still learning each other, still navigating what this partnership was becoming. But as Lillian settled against Ethan's side, listening to his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, she thought about the scared woman who'd boarded a train in Boston 2 months ago. That woman had been running from ruin. This woman, the one she'd become, she was running toward something instead, toward possibility, toward a future she was helping build with her own hands, and that made all the difference. The week after the storm marked a turning point that neither of them acknowledged aloud, but both felt in every interaction. Ethan's ribs healed slowly, and Lillian found herself hovering, checking on him when he worked too hard, insisting he rest when she caught him wincing, bringing him coffee without being asked. He teased her about it once, called her a worrywart, and she'd responded by threatening to let him make his own terrible coffee again. "You wouldn't dare," he'd said, eyes crinkling with amusement. "Try me." But they both knew she wouldn't. Just as they both knew he'd started finding excuses to be in whatever room she occupied, that his hand would settle on her lower back when they walked together, that his good night had become a kiss on her forehead that lingered a beat longer each evening. They were circling something, dancing around feelings that neither was quite ready to name. Christmas approached with little fanfare. Lillian had grown up with elaborate celebrations, trees decorated with imported German glass ornaments, presents piled high, elaborate dinners with a dozen courses. The ranch offered none of that pageantry, but Mary insisted they observe the holiday properly. "We'll have a gathering," Mary announced one afternoon while helping Lillian with the weekly baking. "Nothing fancy, but the Valley families come together. Everyone brings food, we sing songs, the children perform a little play. It's tradition." "I don't know if Ethan will want to sit." "Ethan will do what his wife tells him to do," Mary said firmly. "And you should tell him that having community matters. He's been hiding out here since Sarah died, and it's time he rejoined the living." Lillian thought about that word. Living. Was that what they'd been doing? It felt like more than mere survival now, more than just getting through each day. It felt like building something that mattered. "I'll talk to him," she promised. That evening, while they sat together reviewing the ranch accounts, a task that had become their shared ritual, Lillian broached the subject. "Mary wants us to attend the Christmas gathering in the valley." Ethan's pen stilled on the ledger. "Does she now?" "She thinks it would be good for us, for you specifically, to reconnect with the community. The community that spent the last 2 years pitying me and gossiping about whether I'd ever remarry. The community that sent food when Sarah died, that helped Pete and Tom keep the ranch running when you could barely function, that welcomed me even though I'm an outsider who doesn't know a damn thing about ranch life." Lillian set down her own pen and turned to face him fully. "The community that cares about you, whether you want to admit it or not." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not even a little bit." "Fine, we'll go. But I'm not singing any carols." "We'll see about that." He gave her a look that might have been intimidating if she hadn't seen him try to cook eggs that morning and fail spectacularly. She'd learned that beneath the gruff rancher exterior was a man who was quietly funny, surprisingly thoughtful, and absolutely hopeless at anything involving a kitchen. The Christmas gathering was held at the Pattersons' ranch, the largest property in the valley, with a barn big enough to accommodate the entire community. Lillian and Ethan arrived with a basket of bread she'd baked, proper bread now, golden and fragrant, and jars of preserves Mary had helped her put up in the fall. The barn had been transformed with pine boughs and candles, long tables set up for the feast, and a clear space at one end for the children's performance. Families milled about, bundled in their best clothes, voices rising in cheerful greeting. "Ethan, hail!" Mrs. Patterson descended on them immediately. "And Lillian, we're so glad you came." "Glad. We heard about the storm, about what happened. The whole valley's been talking about it." "I'm sure they have," Ethan said dryly. "Your wife riding out in a blizzard to save you, it's quite the romantic tale." "It wasn't romantic," Lillian said quickly. "It was practical. He was hurt, and I went to help. Anyone would have done the same." "But not everyone did, dear. You did." Mrs. Patterson patted her arm with approval. "You're fitting in better than anyone expected. Even the doubters are coming around." After she swept away to greet other arrivals, Ethan leaned close to Lillian's ear. "See? Gossip. Friendly gossip. There's a difference. Is there? They were pulled into the flow of the gathering, separated as women drew Lillian toward the food tables, and men claimed Ethan for discussions of cattle prices and weather predictions. Lillian found herself in the company of ranch wives, women who'd been wary of her at first, but now included her in their conversations with cautious warmth. "How are you managing with the cooking?" one woman asked. "Mary said you'd never cooked before coming here." "I've learned trial and error, mostly error at first." The women laughed, sharing their own stories of culinary disasters, and Lillian felt something unfamiliar: belonging. These weren't the shallow friendships of Boston society, built on family connections and social obligation. These were women bonded by shared hardship, by the common understanding of what it took to survive in this harsh and beautiful place. Across the barn, she caught Ethan's eye. He was listening to one of the ranchers, but his attention was on her, and when their gazes met, he smiled, a real smile, unguarded and warm. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. The children's performance was endearing chaos: shepherds who forgot their lines, angels with crooked halos, a baby Jesus doll that one of the children dropped twice. Lillian found herself laughing along with everyone else, caught up in the simple joy of community celebration. During the feast, she and Ethan sat with Pete and Tom and Mary, along with several other ranch families. The conversation flowed easily, stories swapped about difficult calvings and narrow escapes from bad weather. Someone mentioned the storm, and Tom launched into a dramatic retelling of Lillian's rescue that made her sound far braver than she'd felt. "And there she was," Tom said, gesturing expansively, "climbing down that ravine like she'd been doing it her whole life, when we all know she'd never seen a ravine until she came to Wyoming." "I was terrified," Lillian admitted. "But you did it anyway," Mary said. "That's what counts out here. Not whether you're scared, but whether you do what needs doing despite it." Ethan's hand found Lillian's under the table, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, and the simple intimacy of that hidden touch felt more significant than any grand gesture. Later, when someone produced a fiddle and the barn cleared for dancing, Ethan surprised her by standing and offering his hand. "I thought you weren't participating," she said. "You've been a good sport about all this. Least I can do is dance with my wife." They moved together awkwardly at first. Lillian knew formal ballroom dances, but this was different, simpler, more energetic. Ethan guided her through the steps, patient when she stumbled, and gradually she caught the rhythm. Around them, other couples spun and laughed, and the barn filled with music and warmth, and the kind of joy that came from people who knew how hard life could be and chose to celebrate anyway. "This isn't so terrible, is it?" Lillian asked as they turned. "No," Ethan admitted. "It's not terrible at all." When the dance ended, he didn't immediately release her. They stood there, slightly breathless, his hand still at her waist, and Lillian was acutely aware of how close they were, how she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes, how his gaze had dropped to her mouth before lifting back to her eyes. "Lillian," he started, but whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by Mrs. Patterson announcing the gift exchange. The moment passed, but something hung in the air between them, unspoken and electric. They drove home in comfortable silence, the wagon creaking through fresh snow under a sky brilliant with stars. Lillian leaned against Ethan's shoulder and his arm came around her, keeping her warm despite the cold. "Thank you for tonight," he said as the ranch came into view. "I didn't realize how much I'd been hiding until you made me stop." "You're welcome. Though I think you did most of the work yourself." "No, you pushed. You've been pushing since you got here, making me see that life didn't end when Sarah died. That I could build something new if I was willing to try." "We built something new," she corrected. "Both of us. Together." Inside the house, they moved through the now familiar routine of banking the fires and preparing for bed. But when Lillian reached her bedroom door, she paused. She hadn't slept in this room since the night of the storm. Every night since, she'd ended up in Ethan's bed, both of them maintaining the fiction that it was temporary, that one of these nights she'd return to her own space. But neither of them wanted that. They just hadn't said it aloud. "Ethan," she turned to find him watching her from his doorway. "Why do I still have a separate room?" "Because when you came here, I promised you your own space, your independence. I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated." "And if I don't want independence, If I want, she struggled for the right words, if I want this to be real, not just an arrangement or a partnership, but a real marriage, he crossed the hallway in 3 strides, cupping her face in both hands. Is that what you want? Yes. I think I've wanted it for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it. I thought I'd never want this again, Ethan said quietly. After Sarah, I convinced myself that partnership without emotion was safer, that I could have a companion without risking my heart. But you, he traced her cheekbone with his thumb. You made me want to risk everything. You made me want to feel again. I'm scared, Lillian admitted, of how much I care about you, of how much it would hurt if something happened, of being vulnerable again after everything I lost. I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of wasting what we could have because I'm too afraid to reach for it. When he kissed her, it wasn't the chaste press of lips from their wedding day. It was real and deep and full of all the feelings they'd been dancing around for months. Lillian's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Ethan's arms came around her like he'd been waiting for permission to hold her like this. They stumbled backward into his room, the kiss breaking only long enough for them to catch their breath before finding each other again. There was urgency, but also tenderness, the recognition that they were choosing this, choosing each other, not from desperation or practicality, but from genuine want. Are you sure? Ethan asked, his forehead resting against hers. I've never been more sure of anything. They came together as partners who'd become lovers, as strangers who'd become intimate through shared struggle and gradual trust. There was awkwardness at first. They were still learning each other's bodies, still discovering what the other liked. But there was also laughter and whispered encouragement and the deep satisfaction of finally allowing themselves to have this. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lillian felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. This was home. Not the ranch, not Wyoming, but this, being held by someone who knew her fully and chose her anyway. I love you, Ethan said into the darkness, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't plan to, didn't think I could, but I do. I love you too. The words felt both terrifying and inevitable. I think I have for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. Why not? Because loving someone gives them the power to destroy you. I learned that when I lost my parents, when I lost everything. I was so scared of letting anyone that close again. And now? Now I think maybe some risks are worth taking. She tilted her head to look at him. You're worth the risk. He kissed her again, slow and sweet, and they drifted to sleep tangled together, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and made something beautiful from it. The next morning, Lillian woke to find Ethan already up, standing at the window looking out at the snow-covered ranch. She watched him for a moment, admiring the strong line of his shoulders, the way early light caught in his dark hair. What are you thinking about? She asked. He turned, smiling when he saw her awake. About how lucky I am. About how I wrote that letter to a marriage broker expecting a business arrangement and ended up with you. Regrets? Not a single one. He came back to bed, pulling her close. Though I should probably clear out that second bedroom, turn it into something useful. Study, maybe, or a sewing room for you. Or a nursery. The words hung in the air. They hadn't discussed children, hadn't talked about the future in concrete terms. But the possibility was there now, real and present. Is that something you want? Ethan asked carefully. Someday. Not right away, but someday. If you want it too. I do. I want everything with you, Lillian. The whole messy, complicated, beautiful life. January brought deep cold and heavier snows, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of winter. Ethan still went out daily to check on the herd, but he was never gone long, always returning to the warm house and warmer welcome. They worked side by side on indoor projects, Lillian improving her sewing while Ethan mended tack, both of them comfortable in companionable silence. But it wasn't all peaceful domesticity. There were arguments, usually about Lillian taking unnecessary risks or Ethan being too stubborn about accepting help. Their first real fight came when she insisted on going out to help with feeding the cattle during a particularly brutal cold snap. Absolutely not, Ethan said flatly, It's 20 below zero. You'll freeze. You're going out in it. I've been doing this for years. I know how to handle it. Then teach me. Her frustration boiled over. You can't keep wrapping me in cotton wool every time the weather turns. I need to learn how to do everything, not just the easy parts. I'm trying to keep you safe. I don't need safe. I need capable. There's a difference, Ethan. They'd stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, glaring at each other, until Ethan finally sighed and pulled her into his arms. You terrify me sometimes, he admitted. Your courage, your determination to prove yourself. I keep thinking you're going to push too hard and get hurt, and I won't be able to bear it. And you infuriate me with your protectiveness, she countered, though she softened against him. I know you're trying to take care of me, but sometimes the best way to take care of me is to let me take care of myself. They'd compromised. She could help with the feeding, but only when he was there to supervise, and she had to wear every warm thing she owned. It wasn't perfect, but it was partnership, the give and take of two strong-willed people learning to navigate life together. By February, Lillian had been at the ranch for 4 months, and the transformation was complete. Her hands were calloused and capable. Her riding had progressed to the point where she could handle Dancer in most conditions. She could cook a decent meal, manage the household accounts flawlessly, and had even learned basic veterinary care from watching Ethan treat the cattle. But more than the skills, she'd transformed internally. The frightened woman who'd fled Boston was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own strength, who'd tested herself against harsh conditions and come through proven. One afternoon, while cleaning out a trunk in the spare room, Lillian found Mr. Garrison's return ticket. The date had long since passed, 1 year from her arrival, the expiration date for her escape route. She held the paper, remembering the desperate woman who'd tucked it away as insurance. She didn't need it anymore. That evening, she showed it to Ethan. Look what I found. He studied the ticket, understanding dawning. Were you planning to use it? I kept it just in case. A way out if things didn't work. But they did work. We worked. She took the ticket back and, before she could overthink it, tossed it into the stove fire. They both watched it catch and burn, curl into ash. No regrets? Ethan asked. None. This is my home now. You're my home. I'm exactly where I want to be. He pulled her into his lap, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. Outside, wind howled and snow fell, but inside they were warm and safe and together. I have something for you, Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to her. Inside was a ring, not fancy, just a simple silver band with a small stone set in it, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. This was my grandmother's, Ethan explained. She was the toughest woman I ever knew. Came west with my grandfather, helped him build a ranch from nothing, raised 6 children in a sod house. She was strong and fearless and kind, and when I think about the kind of woman who could wear this ring, I think about you. Lillian's eyes stung with tears. The gold band from their wedding was fine, but this was chosen, meaningful, a symbol of what they'd built rather than what they'd agreed to. Will you wear it? He asked. Not as the woman I married out of necessity, but as the woman I choose every single day. Yes. The word came out choked with emotion. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped it onto her finger beside her wedding band, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They made love that night with a new depth of feeling, not the desperate passion of early discovery, but the steady certainty of commitment. This was forever, they were telling each other with every touch, every whispered word. This was the life they were choosing together. March brought the first hints of spring, subtle warmings during the day, the sound of snow melting from the roof, the distant call of geese heading north. The ranch began waking from winter's dormancy, and with it came a shift in the work rhythm. Calving season starts soon, Ethan said one morning over breakfast. Next few months will be brutal. Long hours, difficult work. You up for it? Try to stop me, he grinned. Wouldn't dream of it. They worked side by side through the challenges of calving, assisting difficult births, caring for newborns, dealing with the occasional tragedy of a calf or cow lost. It was exhausting, often heartbreaking work, but also deeply satisfying. Lillian discovered she had a knack for the gentler aspects of animal care, and Ethan started letting her handle more responsibilities. "You're a natural at this," he said one evening as they finished tending to a particularly difficult delivery. The calf had survived, was nursing strongly, and mother and baby were both doing well. "I like it. The work, I mean. It feels important, like we're helping create life, sustaining it." "We are." He pulled her close, despite both of them being covered in hay, and worse. "Building something that matters. That's what ranching is." As spring progressed into early summer, Lillian noticed changes in herself that had nothing to do with improved skills. She felt different, her body strange in subtle ways. When she finally allowed herself to acknowledge what those signs might mean, joy and terror warred within her. She told Ethan one evening in late May, the two of them sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, "I think I'm pregnant." His hand, resting on the porch railing, went very still. Then he turned to look at her, eyes wide. "You think, or you know?" "I'm fairly certain. All the signs are there. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." "How do you feel about it?" It was such an Ethan question, not assuming her feelings, but asking, respecting that this was happening to her body, her life, even as it affected them both. "Scared," she admitted. "Excited, overwhelmed, all of it at once." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully. "We'll figure it out together. Same as everything else." "Your mother died in childbirth," Lillian said softly. It was something he'd mentioned once, briefly, and never discussed again. "I know, and I won't lie. That terrifies me. But we'll get the best doctor. Take every precaution. I won't lose you, Lillian. I can't. You won't. I'm tougher than I look." "I know exactly how tough you are. You've proven it every day since you got here." They sat together as darkness fell, both contemplating the magnitude of this new development. A child. They were going to have a child. The arrangement that had started as pure practicality had become a marriage, and now it was becoming a family. "We should probably tell people," Lillian said eventually. "Mary will be insufferable if she finds out we knew for weeks and didn't say anything." Ethan laughed. "She'll be insufferable regardless. Might as well give her something to actually be insufferable about." The news spread through the valley with the speed of summer wildfire, and suddenly Lillian found herself the center of attention in a way she never had been before. Women offered advice, shared their own stories, brought by remedies for morning sickness. Men congratulated Ethan with knowing smiles and warnings about sleepless nights ahead. Through it all, Ethan was steady and present, adjusting the work so Lillian wasn't overexerted, making sure she rested, worrying in quiet ways that she found both annoying and endearing. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him, after he'd tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know, I just want to take care of me. I understand. But you can take care of me by letting me do what I'm capable of doing. Trust me to know my limits." It was the same conversation they'd had a dozen times in different forms. The ongoing negotiation of two independent people learning to be a unit. But they were getting better at it, finding the balance between care and autonomy, protection and trust. By early July, Lillian's pregnancy was obvious, and with it came a profound shift in how she thought about her life. The ranch wasn't just where she lived anymore. It was her child's heritage. The work they did mattered not just for survival, but for building something to pass on. The life she and Ethan had created together was becoming something larger than either of them. One evening, watching Ethan repair a fence while she sat in the shade of the porch, Lillian thought about the woman she'd been 7 months ago. Desperate, frightened, willing to marry a stranger just to survive. She'd expected nothing from this arrangement except basic security. Instead, she'd found love, purpose, a future worth fighting for. Ethan looked up, catching her watching him, and smiled, that unguarded smile that still made her heart skip. He set down his tools and crossed to her, settling beside her on the porch steps. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How much has changed. Any regrets?" She'd lost count of how many times he'd asked that question, and her answer had evolved from uncertain honesty to absolute conviction. "Not a single one," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her growing belly. "This, us, the baby, this life, it's everything I didn't know I needed." "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." And in that moment, sitting on the porch of a Wyoming ranch with the man she'd married as a stranger and loved as a partner, Lillian felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd chosen, and it had chosen her back. The baby arrived on a cold February morning, almost exactly 1 year after Lillian had first set foot on Wyoming soil. Labor started just before dawn, waking Lillian with a pain that stole her breath. Ethan had been sleeping beside her, and when she gripped his arm hard enough to leave marks, he was instantly awake, years of light sleeping from ranch emergencies serving him well. It's time? His voice was steady, but she could see the fear in his eyes. It's time. The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and effort. Mary arrived within the hour, having somehow sensed she'd be needed. The doctor from Rawlins had been staying at the Patterson Ranch for the past week, waiting for this moment, and Pete rode out to fetch him through the pre-dawn darkness. Ethan refused to leave Lillian's side despite Mary's insistence that this was women's work. He held Lillian's hand through every contraction, murmured encouragement when she was certain she couldn't continue, and when she screamed at him that this was all his fault, he simply agreed and told her she was the strongest person he'd ever known. "I can't do this," Lillian gasped during a moment of respite, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced. "Yes, you can. You rode out in a blizzard to save me. You climbed down a ravine. You learned to run a ranch when you'd never left a city before. You can do anything. Those things were easier than this. I know, but you're going to do it anyway, because that's who you are." When the doctor finally arrived, he examined Lillian quickly and nodded with satisfaction. "Everything looks good. Baby's positioned well. You're doing fine, Mrs. Hale. Just keep doing what you're doing." "What if something goes wrong?" Ethan asked, and Lillian heard the raw terror beneath his controlled tone. He was thinking of his mother, of Sarah, of all the ways this could end in tragedy. "Then I'll handle it. That's what I'm here for. But I've delivered hundreds of babies, Mr. Hale, and I can tell you that your wife is strong and healthy. Trust her. Trust the process." The baby was born as morning light broke over the mountains, entering the world with a furious cry that was the most beautiful sound Lillian had ever heard. The doctor placed the tiny red-faced bundle on her chest, and Lillian looked down at her daughter because it was a girl, perfect and whole and real, and felt something in her chest crack open. "She's here," Lillian whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, look at her. She's really here." Ethan was crying too, unashamed tears running down his face as he touched his daughter's tiny hand with one finger. "She's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe—" His voice broke. "Thank you for this, for her, for staying. Where else would I go?" Lillian smiled through her exhaustion. "This is home." They named her Sarah Margaret, Sarah for Ethan's first wife, Margaret for Lillian's mother. It felt right to honor the women who'd come before, to acknowledge that their daughter was built on a foundation of love and loss and survival. The first weeks with a newborn were harder than anything Lillian had experienced on the ranch. The sleepless nights, the constant demands, the worry that accompanied every cry and every moment of silence. But there was also profound joy in the weight of Sarah in her arms, in watching Ethan discover fatherhood, in the slow realization that they'd created an entire human being together. "I have no idea what I'm doing," Ethan confessed one night, holding Sarah awkwardly while Lillian tried to rest. "She's so small. What if I break her?" "You won't break her. You're doing fine." "She keeps making these noises. Is that normal?" "Babies make noises, Ethan. It's what they do." "Are you sure? Maybe we should get the doctor back." Lillian laughed, the sound tired but genuine. "We're not calling the doctor every time she grunts. Come here. Let me show you how to support her head better." They learned together, making mistakes and celebrating small victories. The first time Sarah smiled at them, probably gas, Mary assured them, but they chose to believe otherwise. The first time she slept for 4 hours straight, the gradual settling into a rhythm that, while exhausting, felt manageable. The ranch work continued around the new baby. Pete and Tom took on extra responsibilities without complaint, and Mary was there almost daily, helping with everything from laundry to cooking to the 1,000 small tasks that Lillian simply didn't have time for anymore. "You're doing well," Mary said one afternoon, watching Lillian nurse Sarah while simultaneously reviewing the ranch accounts. I remember those early weeks being nothing but chaos. It is chaos. I just hide it better than I feel it. That's all any of us do. But you're managing, and that's what matters. Spring arrived with its usual chaos of calving season, and this year Lillian watched from the house more than she participated directly. It was hard, feeling sidelined from the work she'd come to love, but Ethan was firm about her not overdoing things while recovering from childbirth. You'll be back out there soon enough, he promised. Right now your job is taking care of our daughter and healing. I miss it, though. The work, being part of it all. You are part of it. You're keeping the books, managing the household, raising our child. That's not less important than what I'm doing with the cattle. It feels less important sometimes. Ethan sat beside her, careful not to jostle Sarah, who was sleeping in her arms. Listen to me. This ranch only works because of partnership. What I do out there matters, yes. But what you do here, keeping everything running, making this a home instead of just a place to sleep between work, that matters just as much. Maybe more. You're just saying that. I'm saying it because it's true. Before you came here, this was just a ranch. Now it's a home. Now it's a family. You did that, Lillian. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. They'd both changed so much from the strangers who'd married out of necessity. They'd become partners, lovers, parents. They'd built something real from the most unlikely beginning. By Sarah's first birthday, life on the ranch had found a new equilibrium. Lillian was back to full participation in ranch work, with Sarah often strapped to her back in a carrier Mary had helped her fashion. The baby seemed to love being outside, gurgling happily at the cattle and reaching for chickens with pudgy hands. She's going to be a rancher, Ethan said with satisfaction, watching Sarah's delight at being in the barn. She's going to be whatever she wants to be, Lillian corrected. Rancher, scholar, adventurer, we'll support her in whatever she chooses. Even if she wants to move to Boston? Lillian considered this, the city that had once been her entire world and now felt impossibly distant. Even then, though I can't imagine why she'd want to. You don't miss it, ever? Sometimes I miss certain comforts, hot baths whenever I want them, having help with the heavy work, not worrying about whether the cattle will survive the winter. She shifted Sarah in her arms. But miss the life I had there? The shallow friendships and meaningless social obligations? No, I'd choose this every single time. That summer brought unexpected visitors. Lillian was working in the garden, Sarah's garden now. She thought of it, having finally claimed the space that had once belonged to Sarah Hale, when she heard a wagon approaching. Visitors were rare enough that she stood, shading her eyes against the sun to see who was coming. The wagon was nicer than most ranch vehicles, and when it stopped in front of the house, Lillian's heart nearly stopped. Catherine Winters stepped down, older and more careworn than Lillian remembered, but unmistakably her oldest friend from Boston. Lily? Catherine's voice was uncertain. Is it really you? Catherine. Lillian was moving before she could think, crossing the yard to embrace her friend. What are you doing here? How did you find me? Your letters, the return address on them. I've been wanting to come for over a year, but it took this long to convince my husband to make the journey west. Catherine pulled back, studying Lillian with wide eyes. Look at you. You're so different. Lillian laughed, suddenly aware of how she must look. Work dress dusty from the garden, hair coming loose from its braid, hands calloused and strong. Nothing like the refined Boston lady Catherine had known. Different good or different bad? Different alive. You were so sad in Boston those last months, like you'd already given up. But now, Catherine's eyes welled with tears, you're radiant. Wyoming agrees with you. It's not Wyoming that agrees with me. It's the life I've built here. Ethan emerged from the barn, clearly alerted by the unfamiliar wagon, and stopped short when he saw Lillian embracing another woman. She beckoned him over, suddenly nervous about these two parts of her life colliding. Catherine, this is my husband, Ethan Hale. Ethan, this is Catherine Winters, my dearest friend from Boston. Ma'am. Ethan removed his hat, ever polite despite his obvious uncertainty about this surprise visit. "Mr. Hale, I've heard so much about you in Lily's letters. She writes about the ranch, about your work together, about your daughter." "Sarah's napping inside," Lillian said. "Come in, please. You must be exhausted from the journey. How long can you stay?" 3 days, if you'll have us. My husband is conducting some business in Rawlins. He's in cattle futures. Thought he might as well combine a personal visit with professional opportunities. Over the next 3 days, Lillian showed Catherine her life. The house that had become home, the ranch she'd learned to run, the cattle, the horses, the chickens that no longer terrified her. She introduced Catherine to Mary and Pete and Tom, to the community that had welcomed her despite her outsider status. But most importantly, she showed Catherine her family. Ethan, who was initially wary of this reminder of Lillian's past, gradually warmed to Catherine's genuine interest in their life. Sarah, who charmed everyone with her ready smile and fearless exploration. One evening, after dinner, Catherine and Lillian sat on the porch, while Ethan put Sarah to bed inside. "I owe you an apology," Catherine said quietly, "for how I behaved when you were leaving Boston. I was so focused on the romance I thought you deserved that I couldn't see the strength it took to choose survival instead. You were trying to protect me. I was being naive. I thought love was the most important thing, that marrying without it was a tragedy. But watching you and Mr. Hale together, seeing how you work as a team, how you support each other, that's love too. Maybe a deeper love than the passionate romance I was imagining." "It wasn't love at first," Lillian admitted. "It was respect, then friendship, then partnership. The love came later, built on all those other things. But it's real, Catherine. More real than anything I've ever felt. I can see that. The way he looks at you when you're not watching, like you're the most precious thing in his world. The way you anticipate each other's needs without speaking. That's not just love. That's a life built together." "It is. And I'm happy, truly happy, in a way I never was in Boston." Catherine reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then I'm happy for you. Even if it means I lost my best friend to the wilds of Wyoming. You didn't lose me. I'm still here, just in a different form, and you're always welcome to visit. 3 days every few years isn't much of a friendship. Then we'll write more, better letters, longer ones. I'll tell you everything about ranch life, and you can tell me about Boston. Different worlds, but we can still be part of each other's lives." When Catherine left, with promises to write and visit again, Lillian felt a sense of completion. Her old life and new life had met, acknowledged each other, and found a way to coexist. She was no longer running from who she'd been. She'd integrated it into who she'd become. The years passed in the way of ranch life. Some easy, some brutal, all filled with work and love, and the slow building of something lasting. Sarah was joined by a brother, James, when she was 3, and then a sister, Emma, 2 years after that. The house that had felt too big for 2 strangers became comfortably full of family. Ethan expanded the ranch steadily, buying adjacent land when it became available, increasing the herd, hiring more hands as needed. Lillian managed the books with a skill that impressed neighboring ranchers, and more than once Ethan credited their success to her careful financial planning. "I'm just doing what makes sense," she demurred when he praised her. "You're doing what's kept us profitable through droughts and harsh winters and fluctuating cattle prices. You're doing what's let us build something we can pass on to our children." The children grew wild and strong, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch work as soon as they were able. Sarah had her father's quiet strength and her mother's determination. James was all laughter and energy, fearless in ways that made Lillian's heart stop. Emma was still too young to show her personality fully, but she had a stubborn streak that promised interesting years ahead. One evening, when Sarah was 8 and asking endless questions about how her parents had met, Lillian told her the truth. "I married your father before I knew him. We made an arrangement because we both needed something. He needed a partner to help run the ranch, and I needed a place to go when I lost everything." "That's not very romantic," Sarah said critically. "No, it wasn't. Not at first. But sometimes the best things start practically and become romantic later." "Do you love Papa now?" "More than anything, except you 3, of course. Did you always love him?" Lillian thought about the stranger who'd met her at the train station, The careful distance they'd maintained, the slow building of trust and affection. No, I learned to love him. I chose to love him, and that choice made it stronger than if it had just happened all at once. I'm going to marry someone I love right away, Sarah declared, like in the fairy tales. That's wonderful, sweetheart. But remember, fairy tales end at the wedding. Real life is what comes after, and that's where the real love is built. 10 years after Lillian had arrived in Wyoming, the ranch was thriving and the family was strong. Ethan had long since stopped looking haunted by memories of loss. Lillian had transformed from a frightened refugee into a confident ranch woman who commanded respect in the valley. They still worked side by side every day, still finished each other's sentences, still had their share of arguments about the best way to handle various ranch challenges. But underlying everything was the deep foundation of trust and love they'd built together. One spring evening, sorting through papers in the desk, Lillian found something wedged in the back of a drawer, an envelope she'd forgotten about. Inside were Ethan's original letters, the ones he'd sent before she came west. She read them again, marveling at how much and how little had changed. He'd promised partnership, respect, and security. No romance, no passion, just honest work and mutual benefit. He'd delivered on those promises and so much more. "What are you reading?" Ethan asked, coming to stand behind her chair. "Your letters, the ones you sent to Boston." "Terrible letters. I'm amazed you agreed to come after reading them." "They were honest letters. You told me exactly what to expect." "Did you get what you expected?" Lillian set the letters down and turned to face him. "I expected security and a roof over my head. I expected hard work and a partnership of convenience. I expected to survive." "And what did you get?" "A home, a family, a love I didn't know was possible, a life I chose for myself instead of one that was chosen for me." She stood, wrapping her arms around him. "I got everything I never knew I needed." "No regrets?" It was the question he'd asked 100 times over the years, and she'd lost track of how many times she'd answered it, but the answer was always the same. Not a single one. They stood together in the quiet house, their children sleeping upstairs, the ranch settling into evening around them. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and the promise of another day's work ahead. Lillian thought about the train ticket she'd burned years ago, the escape route she'd kept just in case. She thought about the desperate woman who'd boarded a train west with nothing but fear and determination. That woman had been so focused on survival that she couldn't see past tomorrow. This woman, the one she'd become, she could see years ahead. Could envision Sarah taking over the ranch someday, James finding his own path, Emma growing into whatever person she was meant to be. Could picture growing old with Ethan, grandchildren playing in this house, the family legacy continuing long after they were gone. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, the question so familiar it was almost a ritual. "How brave I was without knowing it. Getting on that train, marrying a stranger, choosing survival over giving up. I thought I was being desperate and cowardly, taking the easy way out. And now? Now I know there was nothing easy about it. Building this life, learning to love you, becoming the person I am now, that took courage I didn't know I had. But I found it. We found it together." "The stranger you married," Ethan said, echoing the words from so long ago, "he turned out all right?" "Better than all right. He turned out to be exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it." "Why not the man right in front of you?" He was quoting something, and it took Lillian a moment to place it. Words he'd never actually said, but that captured the entire journey they'd taken. Why choose a stranger when you could choose someone you knew? "Because sometimes," Lillian answered, "the stranger is exactly who you need. Because sometimes knowing everything at the start means you miss the joy of discovery. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on someone you don't know yet." She pulled him closer, this man who'd been a stranger and become her home. "Besides, you're not a stranger anymore. You're my partner, my love, my family. You're the person I choose every single day. And I choose you." They kissed, a gentle affirmation of everything they'd built together. Then Ethan released her with a smile. "Come on, let's check on the children and then get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Every day is a long day on a ranch. True, but we face them together." "Together," Lillian agreed. As they climbed the stairs to check on their sleeping children, Lillian felt a profound sense of rightness. This was the life she'd chosen. This was the family she'd built. This was the home she'd made from nothing but courage and desperation and the willingness to take a chance. The stranger she'd married had saved her, but not in the way she'd expected. He hadn't rescued her from poverty or given her security. He'd given her something far more valuable, the space to become who she was meant to be, the partnership to build something meaningful, and the love to make it all worthwhile. And she'd saved him too. Pulled him out of grief and isolation, reminded him that life could be lived instead of merely endured, given him a family to love and a future to build toward. They'd saved each other. That's what the best partnerships did. Years later, when her own children faced difficult choices, Lillian would tell them about the train ride west, about marrying a stranger, about learning that sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most beautiful outcomes. She'd tell them that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. She'd tell them that home isn't where you're born, but where you choose to build your life. She'd tell them that love doesn't always arrive in a lightning strike of passion. Sometimes it grows slowly, built on respect and partnership and shared struggle. And that kind of love, the chosen kind, the earned kind, that lasts. But most importantly, she'd tell them that they were stronger than they knew, braver than they believed, and capable of building lives they couldn't yet imagine. Because she'd done it. She'd chosen survival and found she was choosing life. She'd married a stranger and discovered a soulmate. She'd boarded a train west with nothing and built an empire of family and love and purpose. The woman who'd stood on that Boston platform with a one-way ticket and a heart full of fear would barely recognize the woman she'd become. But they were the same person, connected by courage and choice and the unwavering belief that tomorrow could be better than today if you were willing to fight for it. Lillian Hale, no longer Moore, no longer the frightened refugee from a fallen fortune, stood on the porch of her Wyoming ranch and looked out at the life she'd built. The mountains stood eternal against the sky. The cattle grazed in pastures her family had claimed and tended. Her children slept safely in the house behind her. Her husband stood beside her, his hand finding hers without looking. This was home, not because it was familiar or easy or safe, but because she'd chosen it, and it had chosen her back. The end.